You know, even if you don't have a solid friendship, you could call it that, or even if you don't have friends who you find you drift very far apart from, and ironically didn't earlier on, maybe that does help you in one way, to be Catholic with a small c with people. None of my old friends really had a great deal in common with me, maybe in terms of values, but even those I would probably question. I mean, they don't diverge as massively as some. I mean, we spent a lot of time together, but I think narcissists like to put you with people who aren't really that good for you. And I'm not saying they're delinquents necessarily, but they don't challenge the crowd you hang around with. And it wasn't a really bad crowd, but it's a mixed crowd. A crowd of people who aren't really your kind of interests. And my longest friend as an adult is perhaps one of the most narcissistic people I've ever known, perhaps more than my dad. And at his family unit, I ended up feeling almost like they were my parents, a more draconian version of my parents sometimes. Even though they're from a different cultural background, working class Catholic with a bigger C. And I don't think I knew many people from Liverpool until I met him, to be honest. That whole cultural, whatever the word is, did not seem not really my scene. Not really the way to put it, not really my experience. I grew up in Southport, which is not as nearly as Liverpudlian as the rest of Merseyside. Prior to that, Rainhill, which is also Merseyside, but is also not Scouse Merseyside as such. And I had friends there where we moved from there, which is also a thing to consider. Why would narcissists want you to move when you're only 5 years old, say? And for example, the first friend I met when I was 5, I ended up staying with his family every night after school for a few hours while they were both working full time. But it's like, oh, you can just be shoved in with them. And they tend to be people a little bit poorer from the opposite side of the tracks. Well, they were. I think that, they seem to want the least good for you. It's questionable. And some of the things they expect you to do for yourself are questionable as well, like, well, there's nothing wrong with making your own packed lunch when you're 9 years old, maybe a little bit younger. And yet I've heard of grown men having feminist mothers. One of my teachers doting on her son, and don't get me started on her anyway. It seems rather ironic, doesn't it, that a grown young man who is a mechanic needs to have his mother to make his lunch, who has very feminist views, whereas who my mum doesn't really have any political views, gets me to do it myself. Veering off the subject a little bit here, but the maternal, why didn't they do certain things for you? And why is it, and the paternal, why is it they don't sort of say, well, if you're going to get on in life, maybe I need to challenge this idea of who your friends are, and maybe I need to say, not distract you and not get you onto anything else, like, and not discourage you just because the chips are down, and make even more shit hit the fan, and not beat you with a stick of shame and guilt because of the things you're not so good at, because the cracks of early life have opened up and no one seems to acknowledge the past. And you might say, oh yeah, in your better nature as somebody who has CPTSD, excuse me, Going back to the nature of somebody who has CPTSD and irritable bowel syndrome is that you want to be all things to all people. You want to be kind to people. You want to be loyal, and you're an idealist. You're too naive. You think that you're going to come off on top when you're going to come off well when you're going to come off badly. And really they exploit these weak spots of shame and guilt and naivety in ways they never should have done. And they've been doing this for years. They haven't just been doing this when you turn 16 after your best GCSE results. I think that's a common thing. Like as you approach manhood, I've heard a certain life coach allude to this very strongly, that as you approach manhood, they don't like the fact that you're an adult and that you're going to possibly earn more than them and have more things than them. And this also spills into the idea of relationships. They don't want you to have a relationship better than them, one that isn't a joke, say. Maybe they say, one of the last things I was told is, someone with Asperger's syndrome might be best for you because they have the best values. They have values in common, qualities in common, by my father. And this is set to a backdrop of him talking about sex and how it's important to have enough sex and how he wishes he had more sex, and using that horrible sex word again. And not that it is, but I feel that's crossing my boundary. And that, especially as I'm in my 30s and a lot's happened, and I remember the look, the rather spiteful, envious look. My sister brought a friend round and I happened to enter the kitchen, and I remember all the flirty ways, most of which I haven't even seen, with, say, superficially successful friends and relatives, usually one relative in particular, who happened to be quite glamorous. And I remember how you don't really want to negatively judge these people consistently, though you have done, and then you don't. More cognitive dissonance. You don't really want to criticise anybody who's wrong. You pretend the sort of friends I've had have been better than they have, even though they may be too thick, too naughty, even if they are creative and academic. They've got a lot wrong with them. And yes, you've let me down. He said I'd let him down, and a lot of things to that effect. After all, you've let me down. You know, do me a favour. And good luck making friends, or stay on your own. Be resilient. You've got more resilience than them. They can't live on their own. The gender dynamic of my life. Well, I cook my own meals, wash my own clothes. And, well, don't really earn a living yet.